Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Welcome to an early show today, a pre-show with your host, Lord Hellespont V, live from Los Angeles. I have a very, very special guest today with me, someone who barely needs an introduction. Um, it's really one of the first names who comes to mind, especially on this side of the Atlantic. Someone been who had been with Christie's for a number of years, most recently as a vice president and senior specialist, a frequent contributor to Hodinky, especially familiar to you probably in terms of the reference points videos he did about submariners, about explorers. And he's someone who belongs to this rare breed of watch dealers. I'm saying rare breed because they're almost going extinct, who combines knowledge, passion, and good taste. And you see it in his curation, but you have also seen it perhaps in these collaborations that he did with Jack Carlson from Rowing Blazers, along with Seiko, of course, a couple of other limited edition Seiko 5 sports watches. And most recently, he curated these very unique 12 pieces, 12 vintage timepieces for Mr. Porter. Of course, I have 12 vintage timepieces for Mr. Porter. Sorry about that. Of course, I have in mind someone that you probably already know and that you can guess. It's Eric Wind. Welcome to the show, Eric. Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to connect with you.
Thank you. It's really my pleasure. So today we're gonna talk about collecting vintage timepieces, and I mostly want to learn about your trajectory, and I guess at the end we'll also talk about what you are most passionate about and what you are really chasing after today as well. Behind every timepiece, there's a story. Can you tell me the story of your first watch, Eric? When did you know that this was more than acquiring a wristwatch? When did you have a feeling that this may well be the beginning of a lifelong passion?
I think my first real watch, I would say, was a vintage Hamilton that my mom gave me right before my college senior year at Georgetown. It was a gift from my grandmother to my grandfather for their wedding in 1947. I think she paid about $15 for it at the time, which was significant. And It was called the Neil model. It has these kind of beautiful, more ornate numerals, sort of Americanized Breguet numerals, I would say. And small, like 30, 31 millimeter watch, kind of like a Patek 96, but it was my first mechanical watch. And I was just kind of amazed, looking inside, seeing the movement tick, the beautiful plates of the movement, and it really got me ticked, really got me sort of seriously interested in vintage watches. It got the bug, I would say, for me.
So already at the outset with your first mechanical watch, you were basically blessed with this vintage piece.
Yeah, and it's not that it's an expensive watch. I've bought a couple more on eBay for around $100 each, but it's just that it was such a meaningful watch in terms of history, and my mom had it engraved with my grandfather's initials and my initials on the back, which I like kind of that aspect of personalization of vintage watches, and new watches too. I think more people should get their watches engraved if they don't plan to sell them. But yeah, I just that really got me down the rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you have this vision that might even contradict with what you do, you know, because
Yeah, yeah,
if people get their watches personalized, what are you going to do?
exactly. Yeah, if everyone personalized their watches, I might not have a job, but yeah, it's okay. I think
No,
there's
honestly, I mean, again, I'm sure you will find a way
yeah.
to present them with the passion, with the knowledge you have, but it might probably add an extra challenge to your plate.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah, and it's like even I just sold a watch from 2002. It was a Rolex date in gold. It had an engraving on the back. Had been from a company to someone who had worked there 25 years. So it's nice some companies still kind of continue with the gold watch after 25 years. But I left it with the engraving, and the next owner decided to keep it, even though it's a relatively modern watch, just 20 years old. Uh,
Amazing.
yeah, I mean, it was something that you could have removed if you really felt strongly about it, but it's nice to give that person the option.
So since you shared this beautiful memory at the outset, what can you tell me about your early days as a collector, first of all, or maybe then how this transition happened for you from being a collector to a dealer slash vintage specialist?
Yeah, so I never expected that I'd be doing this full time. Basically, a brief background. When I became interested in vintage watches, I was just entering my senior year at Georgetown. And around that time, I came across this little site called Hodinkee that no one had heard of in its first month or two of existence, which was also 2008. And then that was the first time I heard of a Paul Newman Daytona and a James Bond Submariner and these kind of interesting nicknames for special watches. Then I began to get the vintage bug thanks to Ben Clymer and the early Hodinkee days. By 2010, just under 2 years later, I became a contributor to Hodinkee and began writing about vintage watches. We were even unpaid at the beginning. It was just a passion. And then basically developed a following thanks to the articles I was writing, tried to bring a scholarly approach to it, and by 2015 decided to pivot away from what I was doing at that time, which was biofuels, to join Christie's as vice president senior specialist of watches for the New York team. And I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I can always go do something else or whatever, but let's give watches a try because it's a passion of mine. I had a little bit of trepidation that the hobby might get ruined for me or I might get sick of watches, but thankfully that's never happened. It's just deepened my love affair with watches, I would say. And I started Win Vintage, my own company, in 2017 because I basically saw an opportunity in the marketplace. I felt like I had plateaued at Christie's in terms of what I was learning or opportunities, compensation, really in every way I had plateaued. So it was time to, start my own thing and be my own boss. And haven't looked back for a minute since then. I've really enjoyed it. Coming up on 5 years now of Win Vintage.
Honestly, I think it might well be because of that unique transition you're describing, because as as much as luxury wristwatches have become quite a commodity in the last few years, they never were and they never will be the kind of commodity that oil or coffee is in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe it's just that transition that helped you carry that passion forward in a way. Again, I think it's very unique in um, in terms of the knowledge and the taste that comes together in the pieces you have. And everyone, I mean, I highly recommend, if you haven't checked it out, of course, if you just go to www.windvintage.com. I just posted the link. I'm sure that inventory in and of itself will speak 1,000 words. I want to ask also, what is the first thing you look for in a vintage watch, and why is it condition. Joking aside, can you tell us a little more about how you professionally assess the condition of a wristwatch?
Yeah, so thankfully, so many thousands of watches have passed through my hands between my time at Christie's, time as a collector before that, and now that I can make an assessment on the watch pretty quickly, even just from a photo, as an initial kind of, bypass. I would say pass at it. It's like you could look. Someone just sent me a watch today. It was an early GMT 6542. It looked reloomed immediately. Just the lume was too green, the plot's too large. That obviously can have a dramatic effect to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars on the watch. And I can say with 99.99% probability, just looking at that kind of poor resolution photo, that it's reloomed. So that makes things much easier. I have an eye. Of course, dials are generally the most important thing in any vintage watch or watch generally. That's where the most of the value is. But I would say I'm a big fan of unpolished cases, which is very hard to find because these watches almost always were polished if they ever went back for service. So sometimes I would say it's 1 out of every 500 examples you might find are unpolished. That you cannot really make a full assessment on without seeing the watch in hand. You can tell if it's polished immediately, typically even from a photo, because everything's a little bit soft or shiny or the edges aren't right. But to really know, you have to have the experience of holding unpolished examples of that watch and just have that kind of photographic memory, and then hold the watch and look at it and assess it, because there is very good case restoration now that can make a watch look closer to unpolished.
I know that it's getting trickier by every year. Like you said, on the one hand, you have this increasing depth of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and again, you have said it at the very beginning. You have a scholarly approach, so a lot of this is years of study,
Yeah.
years of hands-on expertise that can't be replaced on a whim. That's why a lot of people need some sort of guidance, some
Yeah.
sort of hand-holding even,
Yes.
or simply the good taste and experience of a vintage watch dealer when they're entering this market.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but again, there's kind of a disproportion right now in the vintage market with the increasing knowledge we have, with the intensifying care we have about the condition of watches. They're becoming either very difficult to find, or there are increasingly new and more cunning methods of restoration that is hard to tell apart, even by well-weathered experts.
Yeah. That's why the other aspect I would say of when I look at a watch is just understanding the provenance of the watch, who has it now, where has it been before. It's not as clear as in the art world. When you're buying a serious painting, everywhere it's been since
Mhm.
it was originally painted. That's sort of recorded, what exhibitions it's been displayed in previously, etc. We don't have that with watches, but you can get that a little bit with Instagram. It's like, okay, I can track this watch across these owners over the last 10 years. And then you kind of go until you can hopefully find that it went through from an original owner's hands to someone. But if a watch has touched, I would say, certain people's hands, either collectors or dealers, I basically won't touch it because it's too risky that something's been done to it during that time. So I generally stay away.
Well, I thought it was only the big brother who was watching us on social media. I guess it's Eric Wind as
It's
well. I'll
it's
be more careful with what I post from now on.
it's funny. Certain watches I've seen trade hands between 5 owners over the course of like 2 years. So you can see it move from person to person. It's hilarious. It's like contact tracing, Where was this watch previously?
Now, this is coming to me extemporaneously. Do you think the new niche, perhaps in a lot of vintage curation, is perhaps single owner watches? Is that a particular premium attached to that, independent of celebrity stardust?
Yeah, it is. It's always a positive to purchase something from the original owner, and people like to hear those words. It doesn't necessarily, of course, I've heard people say original owner, and I know the watch is not original owner. It came from another dealer. It's very hard to obviously prove that without some sort of letter, and even those can get faked. Or I heard of a gentleman who was offering a kind of supposedly original owner Submariner, but he just took a photo of the watch with a random guy on the street and handed him $10 or $20 to have a photo of him handing him the watch, and then created a whole story around it. So, it really is who you buy it from as well, not just those words, original owner.
Well, I mean, I started with every watch has a story. I wasn't necessarily referring to that kind of fiction.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's interesting. Um, Now, I know you do preserve this sort of passion, and I know you have your own collection. Uh, do you have different priorities as Eric Wind, the enthusiast, from Eric Wind, the vintage watch specialist? When you want to get a watch for yourself, when you want to acquire a new piece,
Yeah.
do these priorities bend? Do they perhaps intensify in certain ways?
Well, I think I always have brought a collector mindset to my business. So I try to focus on buying and selling watches that I want to own personally because of the condition, the story, the overall attractiveness and originality of the watch. So that's what I'm interested in for pieces in my personal collection, generally unpolished, special, untouched pieces that are very attractive. I don't mind patina. I like patina that it shows its age. I'm not looking for a collection of watches that are new old stock, but I am looking for originality. So, that is, I would say, the first thing, and that's generally what you see on my website. I probably offer more unpolished vintage Rolex watches than you'll see on any other site, just because that's my focus when I'm trying to acquire things and I have to pay up for stuff. If I'm offered a great watch from an original owner or collector, it's often a competitive situation where a few people are making offers on it, and I'm okay operating on a narrower margin because I want to buy and sell the best quality pieces in the world at any price point, whether it's $1,000 or $1,000,000. So that's the first thing. Um, I have a love affair with a lot of these watches when they first arrive, where I want to keep it, and I say, I try to avoid getting high on my own supply, if you will, um, and that's hard to do. Second, um, you know, I do have a personal collection I maintain of probably at least 50 watches, not all super high value. Some are $1,000 pieces, $2,000 pieces that I love that I'll probably never see again. And that is, I I think that you kind of want to buy from someone that has that mentality versus someone where everything's for sale, because it's kind of like the line "Never trust a skinny chef." You want to eat at a restaurant where the chef has a little weight and is spending a lot of time in the kitchen eating because they know what's good. So, I would say you've got to be careful about buying from any watch dealer who doesn't have any personal watches because that suggests they might not care that much.
But that's a very delicate balance, right? Between not wanting to get high on your supply and wanting to also sample and preserve that passion.
Correct.
That's like walking a tightrope, really.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's not easy, and I try to stay responsible. But I like to, I like to sell watches to good homes. It's almost like it's a child and or a dog. Like for a dog breeder, they want the dogs to go to a good home because they feel passionate about the dogs. Or yeah, that's how I feel about these things. So I want to make sure that the owner will take good care of the watch and not damage it. And hopefully, if they ever want to sell it, that they come back to me.
Adopt, don't shop, I guess, but that can't be a philosophy for this kind of business. But
Exactly.
but honestly, I mean, there was a moment in the market that I was expecting now vintage dealers to have application pieces or something. The way you're describing the situation,
Yeah,
it might
exactly.
well be that you have to get in line, years ahead of time.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's something that always happens in the vintage market anyway, right? You're looking for a very special piece, and you have a dealer you trust. You
Yeah.
can literally tell them, give details, what kind of condition you're looking for, what's your priority, and they can, um, keep that in mind for you. They can go after it for you, of course.
It's honestly very good to have a relationship with someone who's your primary care physician, if you will, your primary dealer, because the really special, spectacular stuff, if that's what you want to collect, it often is not like put up for sale online. So I posted a Rolex Milgauss 1019 last night, and I had sold it before I posted it. And the first client I offered it to, who's one of my best clients, he decided to purchase it. So it was too kind of good a watch to just go on my website to go to anyone that wanted to see it. It was always going to sell quickly to the kind of first or second person I offered it to. And that's something people need to understand. It's like an art dealer. If you're just shopping around, you're not going to get offered the most special piece of art ever. It's not going to go in the window for sale. It's going to go to someone who has a relationship with that dealer already.
Now, I actually have two questions that are kind of tied to each other, but in a way, maybe going in different directions. One thing that I want to ask, of course, without giving away any of your secrets, you were talking about a very competitive market, where especially if you are going after the best examples, unpolished, maybe even original owner. What do you do these days to acquire these watches? How do you go after them?
Yeah.
What are your sources in a very general
Yeah. I
level?
yeah, it's the first thing I think is um having a reputation to be a person that's trustworthy to do business with. So, I don't know if you ever watched Game of Thrones, but a Lannister always pays his debts or her debts. Like, if people know I'm on the other side and they want to sell a watch, I'm not going to ghost on them and disappear. So that's the first thing. There's a lot of that in the world of watches or anything where you send someone a watch and they don't pay, sort of thing, or they string it out for a long time. So that's the first thing. There's generally three sources where I find watches. One would be collectors who have really good pieces from the past that have good provenance, and
Mhm.
maybe it's something I even sold to them when I was at Christie's or something else. So collectors that come to me with great watches, in many cases, it really depends on the watch, because sometimes a collector thinks they have a great watch and it's not. It's over polished, or it's got the wrong dial, or other things. There's just the world of vintage watches offers itself up for a lot of Frankenstein pieces where people
Mhm.
optimize incorrectly because the scholarship wasn't there in the past. So, for instance, I've seen Paul Newman dials in the wrong case, etc., because people swapped things around back in the 80s and 90s before there were distinctions about what serial numbers and reference numbers are correct, etc. So that's kind of the first thing. The second are our original owners are always the priority. So that can be as simple as someone sending me an email. That happens frequently, or an Instagram message, just because of the amount of press I've gotten in the past, and doing the Hodinkee reference points videos, things like that. Someone says, I bought this GMT new in 1970. Is it something you would be interested in purchasing, and that sort of thing? And then walking through it. Again, the majority of these pieces have things that have been replaced by Rolex, or it's been over polished, or maybe a service bracelet, or those sort of things. So it's just important to be aware of that. It's not like everyone's offering me unpolished original owner pieces every day. It's like 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 100. Also, I try to, as much as possible, be in touch with Rolex retailers or jewelry stores, etc., around the country, where someone may bring something in that's still like almost like an embassy point for buying watches, because someone inherits a watch, they're not going to necessarily find me. They'll go to the local Rolex retailer or jewelry store. Often the Rolex retailers don't have the expertise to know what these pieces are worth, for instance, or they're not going to buy it. They can hopefully sell it to me and trust that I'm, a solid buyer on the other side. So that is also another piece. And then I'm always looking at auctions around the world. I'm not typically buying from Christie's, Sotheby's, Phillips, because they're achieving an end user price. So I can't just expect to pay top dollar and then sell it for 10% more. That doesn't happen typically, but sometimes things do slip through the cracks. They each have hundreds of watches per auction. And sometimes you find something undervalued. You're not just betting on the watch itself and its condition, which you have to evaluate closely, but you're betting a little bit on the market. So, 3940s I've been bullish on for years because I'm asked for them so much. So I frequently will bid at auction, also betting that the values are going to go up. So by the time I take delivery of the watch, that I can resell it for, say, 10% more. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And again, I mean, this is just an observation from me at this point. I really like the fact that on the one hand, you're very clear that a lot of what you do depends on years of study and research, knowledge accumulated over time, relationships established over years, even decades, and really the trust you have gained over the years. So none of this can be really replaced or reproduced easily. And especially, I think that's what keeps you a few steps ahead of the game in a world where everyone fancies themselves a dealer in the age of social media. Yet also you have this very, very nice balance and a very generous spirit of collaboration, of sharing your knowledge in forms that are very accessible to the public, very digestible. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that, and the fact that you're here is again a sign of that generosity. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I try as much as possible to give back. I can't tell you how many messages I get per day asking my advice for stuff. I have to be careful because I don't want to make comments about someone's watch that's negative and then I have it get back to the dealer. And also, you're basing it on photographs. It's not always the same as seeing it in person, but I really feel that it's very important to keep this community growing and supportive. And if everyone's just out for themselves, then the community's not going to thrive. The world of watches generally.
Now, I have a very general question because especially on this channel, I keep interacting with people, with enthusiasts who are almost exclusively interested in contemporary offerings, and they keep repeating this rote phrase: "Vintage is a minefield."
Yeah, yeah,
It's always the same sentence. That's what
exactly. And
strikes me the
I
most.
see it every day.
Now, how would you respond to that? And for those enthusiasts who genuinely want to dip their toes into the pool of vintage timepieces, but are thus intimidated, where and how do you suggest they start?
Okay, so absolutely understand that phrase, vintage is a minefield, because it is. The counterpoint is, buy from someone you trust. Don't just hop on Chrono24 or eBay and buy a watch from a random seller around the world. It's probably not going to work out very well. So that's the first thing. Second, you don't need to start with a super high value watch in the world of vintage. I think two watches that every watch lover should probably own. I hate to be like, you must own this, but probably should own them. One is a vintage Rolex Datejust or newer Rolex Datejust in the 36 millimeter size. It's your classic watch. For many years, I was didn't really appreciate them. Then I found kind of the right one for my personal collection, and then I've become sort of obsessed with them. They're just a classic, go anywhere, do anything watch. And a vintage Datejust might be $6,000 in unpolished condition, potentially a little bit, give or take, full set.
On that note, just so you guys know, Eric actually has a very beautiful 16014 on his website right now, and I have the same model.
Oh
So
yeah.
I can absolutely vouch for it. And Eric's example is, of course, miles ahead of mine, to the point that I was very jealous and green in the face in the morning when I was looking at it. But
Great. Yeah,
yes, I can certainly endorse that vintage Datejust in its classical proportions. I think it's a great choice.
On a Jubilee bracelet, you can literally go anywhere, do anything with that watch, and it's the ultimate kind of timeless piece. You can have it water resistant and even go in the pool with it, or do anything you like. And it's always going to be a classic. The other watch I really think is an important piece historically, and everything else, is the Omega Speedmaster. This example just came in today, vintage model. But again, just a classic watch. You could get an 80s, late 70s through a 90s example with a tritium dial, maybe $5,000-$6,000 kind of top retail. And that it's just a classic piece, undervalued, less expensive than even the brand new Speedmaster. I like the tritium models because you get a little bit of that patina in the lume, a little bit of nice warm yellow color. Again, a watch that I think should at some point be in every watch enthusiast's collection because of the importance of the watch with NASA, Apollo 11, Apollo 13, etc. So both of those are relatively risk-free endeavors. If you're looking at, there are specific things you need to look for, but you can learn them through sites online. Moonwatch Only is a wonderful book on the Speedmaster front, but you don't even need to purchase it to purchase a $6,000, vintage Speedmaster. It'll just give you a deeper appreciation for the model. But, you want to make sure if it's the 1980s watch, it should be a Swiss-made T dial with the tritium. Same for the Speedmasters. Just have the few basic tells and try to get the best condition possible, ideally unpolished and all original.
Yeah, but by the way, there are a lot of very nice comments and a lot of praise for Eric Wynn's work in the chat. Dr. Scribbles is saying, when they say by the seller, you can't get a more trusted source than Eric Wynn.
That's
I
very
completely
nice.
agree.
Dr. Scribbles. And I like the comment that Helgestrand just posted. Ironically, I just traded a 1601 day chest from 1968 for a 1990s Tritium Hesselite Sapphire Speedy. That's great. I mean, they're both awesome watches. It's good to own both, certainly at some point, and experience them.
And I know he also has a newer Oyster Perpetual in his collection, so he did replace that just in a way, as well.
That's great.
What are you wearing today, Eric? I wanted to.
Yeah, so I just put on a Universal Genève Aero Compacts. It's got an Astrua signature above 6 o'clock, non-luminous, kind of late 40s. Just a very pretty watch. It feels nice with the kind of white dial with a white shirt in honor of our conversation today. How about you?
Thank you so much. I'm wearing actually a watch that has a lot of sentimental value for me because it once belonged to my father.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's a two-liner 5513.
What year is that?
Late 1968.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's sweet. And it's got the original 7206 bracelet as well, which is great.
That's right. That's right.
That's awesome.
One of the best compliments that I've gotten about this watch was actually from a friend of mine who is more of a contemporary enthusiast, and he jumped on it and said, "Is that a Tudor?" And I was like, "Kind of."
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Now I'm gonna ask, if you have a little bit more time, there are some interesting questions in the chat, some of which you have answered in a way, but
yeah, let's get.
Can we do that?
One question I saw was
we can start with that.
Thomas Burnett asked about Enicar. Oh yeah, he also asked about the Vulcan Cricket. Okay, well, let's do his other one. It's at 5:36 p.m.
Okay.
Yes. Eric, I saw you had an Enicar on your website. What are your opinions on the brand as a vintage brand to collect? I love Enicars. I think they're pretty unusual, rare pieces. One of those brands that was sort of not really appreciated for many years. There's a great book by Martin van der Ven that's about called Time for a Change, and it's about Enicar as a brand, and it's under $100. Highly recommend it. I help sponsor the book. So that is just an excellent resource to kind of page through and see the variety of Enicar watches made over the decades. They're kind of the most valuable Enicars are the chronographs, particularly the Sherpagraphs. Those have a rich Formula One history. Jim Clark wore them, etc. And they're very special, large watches. I think they're great, but my personal kind of preference are the dive watches. I have a Sherpa Ultra Dive that I absolutely love. Ed Sheeran has one, actually, he enjoys a lot. That was formerly in my collection. So Alain Delon wore one. They're just very special, I think, kind of pieces, the dive watches, and appeal to my tastes a little bit more, being a little simpler.
I love that you already have an example of a watch that you really loved dearly and held in your collection, but also had to, in a way, move. I mean, that must be really difficult. Again, I'm just a collector, so I never have to experience that, and I agonize over every decision I make already. So when I get a watch, it's not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
God forbid, of course. You never know.
Yeah. Exactly.
I posted a quick link to Time for a Change book, the website specifically, and
Good.
I have done a video before about Jim Clark's Navitimer reference 806, the twin jet one, but he had that trilogy basically. He had the Gaillet Multichron, he had the Enicar Sherpograph, and the Navitimer reference 806 with that reverse panda
Yes.
dial. Beautiful, beautiful collection. So Team Lotus in general, you know,
Yeah.
both of them had a Navitimer. In fact,
I love them. I love vintage Navitimers. I have one in my collection. I think they're just also spectacular watches, the 806 and 809. And just again, like something that is so undervalued, like vintage Speedmasters compared to everything else.
Wonderful. Another question by Thomas Burnett. I saw a Vulcan cricket that you have. Where did you get your fascination for alarm watches?
So alarm watches, I think, are one of the coolest complications. They can be annoying if you don't pay attention to them and you have them going off at random times. But I have a pretty extensive collection of Vulcan crickets. I also have a few Jaeger-LeCoultre Memovox watches, and I love them. Crickets are kind of one of the things I'm most passionate about. I like it for two reasons, really. One is the presidential history. Presidents since Truman have been wearing them. Biden has one, but it's pretty neat to have that kind of continuous line. Second, the alarm just sounds so cool. You can interact with the watch in a different way. And they remain very undervalued. They've gone up a bit in price from when they used to be $200, $300 on eBay, but they're still undervalued in the scheme of things. And they're very difficult to find nice examples because people bought them and really wore them hard. So I really, really like them a lot.
And I mean, if I may, I have always seen them as a very accessible way of getting as close as you can to one of the most prestige complications, of course, which is the chiming watch, right? You know, which is a minute repeater.
Yeah.
Almost the same romanticism, not quite.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite the same thing, but the technology is not that different, actually. And in fact, some of the early minute repeater watches were converted to be alarms, including from Vacheron Constantin for a Maharaja, that they converted a pocket watch into an alarm complication, modifying the minute repeater. So I think they're just fantastic. I find them handy, actually, as an alarm for waking up in the morning. Even though it's kind of an annoying way to wake up, it gets you out of bed to go turn that thing off if it's a loud alarm. And
what is not annoying, Eric?
Exactly. Exactly.
You might as well have an alarm watch. I think that's the most romantic way. A mechanical one.
Exactly.
Fries says, to what extent is Radium a no-go? Interested in starting the Dirty Dozen?
So Radium is one of those issues I would say is somewhat controversial. The reality is we can't know for certain what type of health threat it is, I would say. In general, I don't wear a lot of Radium watches myself. I do have some in my collection. They're just pieces that are so beautiful and special. I just can't imagine selling them. Some early crickets and an early Rolex Submariner, etc. But you can measure the radium level, basically the radiation level, with a Geiger counter. So that helps. And you can get basically radon detectors to make sure that you're not breathing in too much radon, because the radium does give off radon. Obviously, that's not great for your health. So it's important to have it in a well-ventilated area. You know, a lot more collectors are basically just not touching Radium watches because they say it's not worth the hassle. But I think they're some of the most beautiful watches, these, you know, watches with luminous material from the 1930s, 40s, 50s. The transition was around 1962 when we saw the switch to tritium. But yeah, it's something I wear selectively, I would say, for myself.
And ideally in open air, as you mentioned, after having done the
Yeah,
necessary checks.
yeah, you got to be. If you have a whole bunch of Radium watches, you don't necessarily want to have it in a closet without any ventilation. I had a client who didn't even have that many, but he had it in a non-ventilated closet, and he put a radon detector in there, and it was something like 10 times the recommended government level of radon. So he was freaking out a little bit, and moved them to somewhere else where there was better ventilation. And then it went back down to basically below the government recommended level. Yeah, it's good.
Good to hear. Now, you said a few things about the traditional auction circuit, but Halya has an interesting question here. What does Mr. Wint think of loop this as a concept versus traditional auction processes for the future? Will Phillips, Christie's, etc., still command the best vintage?
Okay, so I don't personally feel that. I guess you can. I'll answer this in a multi-part way. First, on this and sort of online platforms, I think that they can be successful. You know, for instance, Loop This operates on basically a 10% buyer's premium. Their cost of doing business is a lot less than a Christie's, a Sotheby's, Phillips, because they don't have the auction catalogs, public previews, all of that sort of thing. Even when I was at Christie's, they were spending north of 30 million a year just on catalogs and shipping. So it's huge, and everyone still was unhappy because many people didn't get catalogs, and Christie's was continually kind of cutting the list on who get catalogs. They're still spending that much. So I bid at Christie's and I don't even get the catalogs, but now, so
if you're listening,
so don't be offended. I don't even get the catalogs and I work there, but so and bid there frequently. So I think that's the first thing. I think they're fixed to that kind of 10% margin, which is good if they do a lot of volume or higher value pieces. 10% on a $8,000 Hoyer isn't that exciting by the time you do all the expenses and shipping and everything else. $800 you're making in buyer's premium isn't that exciting. So in general, having talked to Eric Koo about it, obviously they want higher value pieces if possible, like anyone, and they're trying to limit the kind of less expensive things or things that have condition issues or other problems. They have to be careful as well, because people offer them things that are incorrect and have Frankenstein kind of parts, wrong dials or wrong movements, etc. So that's the first thing. So I think they can be successful. I welcome all kind of efforts to disrupt the traditional auction process. I think it's a good thing. Competition is a good thing, and it's better than the era of when it was just Christie's and Sotheby's back in the 1990s, and a number of the executives went to prison because they had a price fixing scandal. Basically,
okay.
The two chief executives were meeting up and saying, we got to hold the line to 10%, sellers fees no matter what. And then otherwise we're not going to make any money if we get very competitive and just, fight to get every consignment. And then the government ruled that was, duopolistic behavior. So they went to prison. But that's the first thing. Second, I actually don't think that the auction houses are getting the best vintage watches right now. They're getting lots of major collections of modern pieces, obviously Journes, Dufours, things like that, where there's kind of uplift in the market. But if you look back over the last season, May and June, for Geneva, Hong Kong, New York, I really didn't see many, if any, quality vintage watches go through the sale. It was almost all modern pieces from the last 25 years. Quality vintage pieces are either being sold through dealers like myself or collector to collector, and people don't feel the need to give the auction house 25% plus of the profit on that watch when the market is pretty well determined, and you could offer it through someone like me, and I might take 10% of the gross sale instead of giving up 25%. And there's so much risk because the auction houses always want super low estimates, like estimates that are a joke, where it's like a quarter of what it should sell for, because they don't really want to work. They want it just to be a feeding frenzy, and then they don't have to work very hard if it starts with a super low estimate.
Yeah, I can certainly confirm that also. This has been a trend now for some years, but especially in this very last season, certainly the number of contemporary independent watches that I've seen really outnumbered heavily
Yeah.
the best of vintage examples in the auction circuit. That's a very good observation.
If you look at blew my mind, but I have reviewed all the catalogs in Geneva, so across 4 auctions, Phillips Christie's, Sotheby's, and Antiquorum in May. There were about 238 Royal Oaks at auction, which represented 13% of the total amount of watches. Typically, that Royal Oaks accounted for less than 1% of the auctions. So it was absolutely a Royal Oak palooza. And
right, the 50th anniversary really.
Yeah, and just that's kind of a reflection of all this hype. Obviously, we're seeing a lot more Nautiluses than we ever saw before. Journes used to never come up for auction. It's all, mostly those types of hype watches, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that could be another hour-long conversation.
Yeah.
The Nautilus resurgence, or really emergence, since 2016, which is connected, of course, with the 40th anniversary. The way Royal Oak came forward leaps and bounds in terms of being a commercially desirable watch since the 40th anniversary, and now with the 50th anniversary, that can be its own thing. But I will shift gears a little bit and combine 2 questions so we can save a little bit of your time as well. Dr. Scribbles is asking Eric's oldest watch in his collection, pocket or wrist, and Thomas Burnett was asking about pocket watches. Do you think that a watch collector should have a pocket watch in the collection to appreciate the history of timekeeping to the fullest?
Yeah, so on the pocket watch front, definitely there's a few beautiful ones I have that I love. I would say I've grown to appreciate pocket watches more with time. I think any collector will with time. Of course, everyone gets interested in wristwatches first and foremost. But just holding these things, and my son, Charlie, he's 8 years old, showing him vintage pocket watches, he can really interact with it and kind of hold it in a different way than a wristwatch. So there's a few vintage Rolex pocket watches we have, and Patek Philippe, things like that are very special and very inexpensive relative to what these things would cost if they were a wristwatch. The wristwatch would be 10 times or 100 times more expensive in many cases. So that's the first thing. I think you can find really amazing Longines, Hoyer, all kinds of kind of special things, Omegas, IWCs, often for under $1,000. And it's really just about finding the best condition, because it's hard to find good ones. Again, they weren't really water resistant, so you see a lot of repainted dials and damaged movements and damaged dials. My oldest watches, I have a few watches from my great-grandfather that date back to the 1800s, pocket watches as well.
Amazing.
The oldest wristwatch that I have in my collection that I wear, on occasion, is a Patek Philippe from 1927 in white gold. It's a rectangular watch that's kind of curved along the wrist. It's a reference 42 with a sector dial. I really love it in white gold. It was a gift I selected for my 5th anniversary from my wife 5 years ago, and it's just a classic piece.
Amazing. There was a question earlier. I can't find the exact one, but it was about, all right, is it a terrible thing to buy a redialed watch if you manage to get it for a bargain? If the case and the movement are okay, you can still enjoy it, no?
Yes. There, often these things were refinished by local watchmakers, often in a very pretty high quality way. Certain watches were often refinished, like Cartier, very common just because the cases were not very water resistant. Vintage IWC, vintage Audemars Piguet. I see a lot of those pieces that with reprinted dials done by the factory, in fact, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So it can still be a high quality reprint. Obviously, it's not as appealing to collectors. It's not as appealing to me generally, but it can still be a very special collectible watch, and certainly shouldn't be discounted as not worth owning.
Yeah, so with the knowledge that it will never rate for the same amounts
Yeah.
as something that is truly original and well preserved. If it is something you want as part of your collection, and if you can find it for the right price for you, why not? But of course,
Yeah. And
without any
yeah,
delusions about its value on the market.
exactly. And say your budget is limited, but you really want a vintage AP time only watch. You can find sometimes reprinted ones for $1,000 to $2,000, depending on the watch. And if it was original dial, it might be $4,000 or $5,000. So you could still have a great watch, but it's probably not something you'll see on winvintage.com. It's just not my focus, I would say.
We understand. So maybe two quick questions to conclude our discussion, because again, I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you have a very busy schedule. MLMJ asks, what do you think about vintage quartz Cartier? And Uncle Jonga has a question about, I know this is centered around vintage. Knowing your love for all things Rolex, what is Eric Wynn's favorite Rolex in the current lineup?
Okay, so quartz Cartier, again, you can get some very cool models. The Benoit often is quartz, the older pieces, but it's just a cool watch designed after the bathtub. So that is, that's certainly cool. You can find them very inexpensively. And then, some of the quartz tanks and things like that. It's just, it allows you to get a certain very attractive look for a lot less. So if that's what you want, it's certainly fine.
I think that goes for vintage and contemporary pieces.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value to be had in a quartz dress watch, especially if you're treating it genuinely as a special occasion watch. You're wearing it once every so often. You just want to pick it up, strap it on, and go.
And the
you have
model,
something,
particularly without a seconds hand ticking all the time, it's much nicer. If it's just the hour and minute hand, you can't really tell. So yeah,
and you have something sleek, discreet, thin.
yeah. So
there's always great value in that.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. The thing that from a collector side gets me nervous is just that these quartz movements wear out. So they need to be replaced often every few decades. That kind of affects the collectability of it. But if that's not why you're buying it, it's not a huge deal. My favorite modern Rolex is the Daytona 116500 LN with a white dial. That's my personal favorite. I also like the Palm dial Datejust, particularly nice. Fluted bezel being in Palm Beach. I'm on a few wait lists to get one. I sold one recently for a client, but I can't see myself paying above retail to buy one, but it's a cool watch. My Daytona, I got it retail. That's a forever watch, and it's just a great sort of go anywhere, do anything piece. And I just bought my father his first Rolex, which I plan to present to him shortly. Hopefully he's not watching, but I bought him a Submariner, which is always kind of his dream watch. And it's really exciting to be able to give that to him.
Date or no date?
No, it's a date with the green bezel, being that we're
Okay.
close to Green Bay. So I thought it's pretty cool. And he likes the date, actually. He's very practical that way. But when we've talked about my first kind of luxury watch experience was basically going into a Rolex retailer when I was in 8th grade, and he was drooling over Submariners with dates at the time. But then he was saying, "Well, you've got college soon. I don't want to spend your college education money on this." And he's never bought one for himself. Very selfless.
Well, now things have come full circle again. I hope uh, Senior isn't watching this stream,
Yeah,
so it will still be a surprise for him.
dude. Yeah,
And again, it shows just the amazing breadth and passion you have for watches. Period. All kinds of watches, really. Dr. Scribbles was commending you on this. The breadth of your collection is amazing, and again, so is the breadth of your knowledge and passion and care. Thank you so much for being here.
no,
Thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your knowledge with us.
thank you. It was awesome. And please keep in touch. I hope to be on here again one day.
I hope so too, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This has been great to have Mr. Eric Wind with us. Please go and check out windvintage.com. Again, even as a platform of digestible scholarship, really, it is great to see. And as Eric said, even from the pictures, there's so much that you can learn in terms of what are desirable examples, what are well preserved, usually unpolished examples of these very desirable vintage watches, which has been Eric's specialty now for quite some time. Thank you so much for being here, Eric.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care.
Take
I'll
care.
see you.
See you.
Bye. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I will actually end the stream right now. I hope I will be with you later tonight as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support and presence. Please upvote on your way out. Share the link to this stream with others. Bring more people to the platform. That's the best way you can help grow this channel. Guys, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, I bid you adieu. Thank you.